A good go-to.
Yeah, it's nice.
It's light. It's light. It's good chilled.
Chill vibes. Chill vibes.
Podcast police. Arrest this man. He talks in maths. He analyzes lyrics he doesn't understand. I'm Jason Bemis Lawrence. This is Before the Stream, my podcast, where a guest, or in this case, two guests, and I revisit an album that was important to us in our past, maybe is still important to us. You know, we check back in on it, how we heard it then, what we hear now, what context has been provided by the last 24 years in the case of this album. Today we're talking about OK Computer, the third studio album by the English rock band Radiohead. It was released on May 21st, 1997 on EMI subsidiaries Parlophone and Capitol Records. The band produced the record with Nigel Godrich, who has gone on to produce, I think, just about everything else they've done. He's kind of another member of the band. Movies in the theater, May 21st, 1997, were Austin Powers' International Man of Mystery, the first one, The Fifth Element, and Jurassic Park 2, The Lost World. Maybe some holdovers from April were Grosse Point Blank, Jackie Brown, and Anaconda. I think I saw all of those in the theater. Went to a lot of movies, I guess, in 1997. Top songs at that time were Bop by Hanson, Hypnotized by the Notorious B.I.G., Return of the Mac by Mark Morrison. I don't know that song. What is that? Those are all in the U.S. And Love Fool by the Cardigans, You're Not Alone by Olive, and I Believe I Can Fly by R. Kelly in the UK. This is a special episode for me. I'm going to go ahead and make it a double episode so that I can ramble a little bit here at the beginning, pay some tribute, talk about these two fellas that this conversation is with. This is special because it's only the second episode that was done in person with the people. The very first episode, episode number 1, was with my friend Natasha in my apartment in Brooklyn. And after that, the pandemic was upon us, and everything has been over Zoom, except for this. This was recorded in September 2020. I've been waiting. In September of 2020, my family and I had left New York. We were in Nashville, and I rented a car and drove up to the Isokon, D. James Goodwin's studio in Woodstock, to rehearse and then record Jesse Marchant's 5th studio album. We all got tested and quarantined beforehand and made sure that we did it safely, but I was nervous driving up there. It was kind of a scary time. I stopped to pee once. I went inside the thing. It wasn't a good feeling. I went inside the rest stop bathroom. Probably should have peed outside, but it worked out okay. Stayed at a nice little hotel on the way up the night before. It was nerve-wracking. Didn't eat any food that wasn't brought by me. Must have gotten a coffee somewhere. But other than that, nope. And got there to the Isokon, and we rehearsed for a few days, then recorded for a few days. And I waited to put this out because Dan had already done an episode. Dan and I had talked about Bad Motorfinger, and Jesse was planning to do a solo episode, which ended up being on Weezer, the first album. And I wanted to wait to put this out until Jesse had already done his, and then once that came out, I had some other ones going, and I waited, and it just worked out that it came time to put this one out right at the time that the album is now about to come out. So the album we were there working on, Jesse Marchant's Antelope Running, it's out in 2 weeks as of the release of this podcast, Friday, June 25th on Anti-Fragile Music Recordings. And it also works out that this month is the last month that Dan will be in that studio, in that house that has been so special for me and Jesse and so many people. He's moving out, and I haven't really talked to Dan about it, so I can't speak too much about it, but I think that I'm excited for him to have another place of his own. But the house, the Isokon, is very special, and I know there's a lot of people who feel the same way. Jesse was the person who introduced me to that place. I came up there when I first started playing with Jesse. The first real thing I did with him, other than rehearse, was go to the Isokon, my first time there, and record the Stray Ashes live performances at the Isokon. Those are on, I think, the streaming services and YouTube. Jesse and Anthony LaMarca and Andrew Carlson and I. And I was blown away by the place and by Dan specifically, just everything he did. But also the place was such a little haven in the woods, and just the perfect vibe for playing, recording music. And I knew I wanted to keep going back, and I did keep going back. We made Jesse's third album, the self-titled, and his fourth album, Illusion of Love, and now this fifth album there. I also made recordings with Heather Woods Broderick, her Invitation album, which I love dearly, and multiple Bodies Be Rivers recordings, Dog Adrift, Lauren Balthrop. So I can't believe that I won't be back in that building, but I know that Dan is going to keep doing everything that he does, which is so special. So he's going to take that to a different place, and all the magic really comes from him. But it's bittersweet to listen to this talk that we had there, now knowing that is my last time there. But I love these guys. I love this talk, and this is going to be the first part of it. It was just the three of us up there working. Stuart Bogey later remotely recorded some really beautiful wind instrument parts. I'm kidding. Logan Cole plays bass beautifully on the album, and he's a joy to play with and was a joy to work with up there. He opted not to be in this episode and this talk because he was tired, and that makes perfect sense. He's probably the only sane one of us, because we had a long day. We had some longer days rehearsing, and then once we started recording, we went a lot of hours every day, and it made perfect sense to just go to bed when we were done. But Dan and Jesse were up for it, and we had this talk in the control room at the Isokon. Dan set up the mics and recorded it, which is very nice. Probably the best sounding talk this podcast will ever have. Just before we started, Dan had told us about someone randomly and inexplicably giving the studio or the address a 1-star rating on Google Maps, which pulled down his rating to 3 stars because I think there was only one other review or something like that. So that's where that comes from at the beginning of this conversation. This is me and D. James Goodwin and Jesse Marchant talking about OK Computer. We are here all together at the Isokon studio, where
3-star rated. The 3-star rated Isokon studio.
3-star rated on Google Maps. The Isokon studio. D. James Goodwin and Jesse Marchant are with me. Guys, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Definitely a 3.5-star experience.
Yeah. I hope to make it at least 3.
We'll bump it up. Maybe I'll give you a review. We'll see how you do.
I need to kick it up a little bit.
We are here all together working on the 5th Jesse Marchant LP album.
LP5.
But for now, we'll be talking about OK Computer. Jesse, do you remember buying this album or first hearing it?
I don't know. I don't actually remember buying it. I think a friend of mine gave me a copy of it. When it came out again, 2007?
Or no, 97.
97, right.
Yeah, it was, whoa.
Yeah, I was still in college at the time.
Right.
Weird era in my life. I think I had it on a CD disc, like a Walkman or the Discman.
Mm-hmm.
And I was listening to it at least on a daily basis, and I was listening to it on my trip to college in the morning on the motorcycle with headphones on. I remember that specifically. And then
Could you hear it on a motorcycle very well?
yeah, it was like a pretty low speed drive.
Yeah.
But I listened to it for everything. I listened to it running, like walking.
Right.
It was just one of those records that I listen to all the time.
Yeah.
97. I mean, that was 23
Yeah, I was 16.
years ago.
I know.
Yeah. It's a long time ago.
insane.
Yeah.
Like, that feels like classic rock to me now
Yeah.
when I think of it in those terms.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about that record, too, for me, is it lingered for, like, over a decade.
Sure, yeah.
I listened to it on a regular basis for at least a decade.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it didn't age to me. It always sounded fresh. I mean, it had the opening track. The way it opens is just...
Iconic.
Yeah, it's just great. I mean, that was the thing. You go out on a jog, just hit that and start running.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was exit music for a film on that record?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's to me one of the great Radiohead songs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I want to know when it was for a film. Was it for that Romeo and Juliet film with Leo and
It might have been.
and Claire Danes?
Mm-hmm.
Because I feel like that came out in like '96.
Right, and Tom York was...
It did, yeah.
Yeah.
'96 Baz Luhrmann film. So I guess it was for that.
Yeah, I think that's my recollection of it, too.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That ended up on the record.
It's a cliche thing to say, but to me, the biggest thing that was the sort of the craziest part of OK Computer is how different it is from their previous two records.
Mm-hmm.
You get a couple glimpses of it maybe in the bends, but just the change, the complete left turn from anything before it. I mean, Kid A arguably had even more of that, but OK Computer was just revolutionary in the sense that, like, the only band that I'd ever heard in my life that could do anything like that was the Beatles.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh, they can make this record, but completely make a different record the next time out.
Yeah.
And OK Computer was that. From just the minute you press play, you're in for a very different ride than you've ever heard before.
And and the pop songs, too. They're super catchy.
Yeah.
Every song is super catchy and beautiful.
And I remember watching Paranoid Android, the video for it,
Mm-hmm.
because I don't think I had much of a conception of Radiohead until OK Computer. I knew Creep, of course, because that song was ubiquitous.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure there's a song on the bends that was really big. I can't place what it is.
High and Dry.
It might have been High and
And
Dry.
Fake
That's
Plastic
right.
Trees.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I heard that stuff, but it never really... when you're a kid and you're like the contrarian, and you're like, oh fuck the Beatles. I like I like the Trogs more, or whatever. And I think I was like, fuck Radiohead. I like Blur more.
Right.
And so I didn't pay attention to Radiohead. But then I saw the video for Paranoid Android, and I was like, what? This is really, this is crazy weird.
Yeah.
And that song made me get the record, and it was like, I was hooked from then on.
Yeah.
I totally got it.
Uh-huh.
And I still, interestingly, I can't go back and listen to the bends. I can't. I just don't really care for that record.
Yeah, I don't listen to it much either anymore.
Yeah.
It feels like a different era started for them.
It just doesn't sound as good either.
It doesn't.
It's so, a lot of the production doesn't really hold up in the same way.
Yeah. And it has
me, at least.
a sort of, I hate even bringing this up, but it sounds a bit like somebody in the camp at some point referenced Oasis and said, we need to compete with Oasis.
Yeah.
That's what it feels like to me,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But OK Computer is just from such a different place.
Mm-hmm.
It's just so vastly different on every level.
Right.
Yeah, it's
And
really
Pablo
tight.
Honey doesn't even exist to me. I don't even know what that record sounds like.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I haven't listened to that one in a long time. That's definitely just...
And the videos for OK Computer were awesome. I think
Right.
Jonathan Glazer made a couple of them, and they were really brilliant.
Yeah.
Did he do the Karma Police video?
Yeah.
Yeah, and the back of the car. I mean, that's just a brilliant fucking video.
Yeah.
Yeah,
really
I
good.
mean, you see it once and you don't forget it.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
That's the Jonathan Glazer thing, though.
Mhm.
All his stuff is like that.
yeah.
Did he do No Surprises?
That one was great too. I mean,
Was that the black and white one where they're jumping in slow motion?
No, that was Street Spirit.
Oh, okay.
No Surprises was the diving helmet filling up with water.
I think that was
shot.
Glazer. Yeah, that's a beautiful video.
I mean, that's great. It's
one of the best.
It's just like the most simple concept, well executed.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I remember I was trying to read about how they did that because it's quite long. He's in there for a while underwater.
Yeah.
I know.
I don't know how they did it.
And you see him struggling, like he's legit struggling.
Yeah, and he doesn't blink for a while.
They show it in that the movie Meeting People is Easy.
Yeah.
I haven't seen that in a long time too, but I remember seeing that in the theater in college when that came out, probably '99 or at some point after they were touring for this album, I think. Mm-hmm. And they show behind the scenes of that video where he's just constantly like having to. He probably was able to pull something or whatever to drain the water and gasping for breath.
And am I wrong that OK Computer was the first record with Nigel, right?
Yeah. Yeah, because I think he was working as an assistant on the bands.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And then they clicked with him because I think that was John Leckie.
That was John Leckie, yeah.
And
it's an interesting thing, though, to think about. That's their first record with Nigel, and it clearly was a collaboration that, it's like George Martin and the Beatles. I mean, again, those comparisons seem trite at this point, but they're apt.
Right.
Because he clearly is another member of the outfit, and whatever vision is shared between the band and then him is remarkable, and it transcends anything else you could say or think about the record.
Yeah, it feels like complete cohesion.
Yeah.
So you said the video for Paranoid Android made you go out and get the record. Do you remember specifically?
I think that's right. I do remember that OK Computer, Kid A, and Amnesiac. It's sort of funny, actually. I remember my first times listening to each of those records. I was driving to Massachusetts.
Wow.
In some odd coincidence of time and space, I was driving I had bought the record maybe at the closest record store and then was making a drive to somewhere in Massachusetts for each of those three records. And I do remember from OK Computer forward, like Kid A and Amnesiac being completely bought and sold. Like I was in the program, and OK Computer, they were lulling me into the program. Mm-hmm. So I remember having some moments. I do remember the drive when I first listened to it and just thinking like every other song, like I just don't understand what this band is doing, but I love it at the same time. Right. And it was just completely foreign to me, And I think because I was working through preconceived notions about what I knew of the band too, which was a big part of it.
Yes.
But yeah, I remember driving at sunset through like into Great Barrington or something and listening to the record. Right. Yeah, and then it stayed with me for quite a while. I kept listening to it a lot from then on out.
It's so interesting to think back on that one that I wasn't fully in. Every record since then I've known well in advance of when it was going to come out and anticipated it so much and got it on the first day. But that wasn't the case with OK Computer because Pablo Honey was fine, and I think I owned it at some point. But I know I had the Creep cassette single. It was mostly about that song back then for me. And then the Bends I thought was cool. I may have bought it, but they hadn't distinguished themselves so completely or even all that much from the other bands I was listening to. It felt like, oh, that's another alternative band that I like and listen to. And then I know I didn't get OK Computer on the first day, or it may have been a while. Yeah. I specifically remember listening to it in between semesters of my freshman year of college. So that would have been end of 97, beginning of 98, I guess. And just being back at home at my parents' house and not having that much to do. I was probably playing video games or something. But they had this big stereo system in the basement. One of those ridiculous old stereos from the 90s.
Buck's Stereo Warehouse.
Probably.
It was Boogie Nights.
Onkyo, I remember. And just all the big boxes. I don't know if the like equalizer was even hooked up. I never even knew what it did. But I remember sitting there and playing like Madden football or something and just playing the record over and over and over and just not really knowing what I was hearing, but knowing that it was sinking in that I loved it on just a much different. And it was just amazing the jump, as you said at the beginning, that they made from the bends. It felt just so original and like just such a world.
It truly redefined. I mean, it certainly redefined indie rock, and it probably defined what most people consider experimental. Even though when you look at it through the prism of the rest of their records, it's probably the least unconventional of all of the records following that.
Right.
But at the time, it just felt so strangely accessible, but really experimental. The sound changes, color changes in songs, within songs was pretty, like from a production level, was super influential for me.
Right.
And I think, I think Soft Bulletin probably came out around the same time. And I don't remember which preceded which, but I remember the feeling in my gut of somebody ripping off somebody else. And I think it was the Flaming Lips ripping off Radiohead.
I think maybe that was 98.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I recall, though, OK Computer becoming a reference point for a lot of people.
Right.
People who were inclined to think differently about pop music. And it just became a real, like a pillar of something that a lot of people started to reference that were interested in changing things up.
Right. Yeah. Even the drums, I mean, on Airbag, first track, the hi-hat, the opening and closing of the hi-hat is very loud. I didn't understand it at the time, but I knew that there was something different happening, but I didn't really understand that wasn't just a drum take.
Right.
At the time, that it couldn't be, even regardless of how you mic it or whatever, that couldn't just be him playing one take of drums.
Sure,
even though that's kind of how you perceive it as you're listening. You picture the band playing.
Yeah. I'm sure there's that thing, too, of like Nigel was a young guy and wanted to break rules. And I certainly remember being that age and wanting to you just wanted to fuck shit up, and you wanted to be...
They would have wanted to break it up and chop it up that way, even if it could have been played.
Yeah.
And that attention to detail so that it just has a different effect, and
Exactly.
they were aware of that.
Yeah.
And I feel like they do that all the time.
Yeah.
They dwell on these small details that have a huge emotional impact.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, that album with OK Computer, what I learned about that was how songs grow and expand for you emotionally over time. Before that, I didn't understand that if you listen to a song like 100 times, that eventually it would have a different impact on you, or if you listen to a record that you liked a lot, that eventually the favorites you had would change. And that happened to me all the time with that record, where I've had almost every song on that record be a favorite at one time, and falling out of favor.
Right.
Yeah, because there's so many ballads.
Yeah.
Right.
There's so many ballads, and the emotional punch of those ballads is just absurd.
Yeah.
Even The Tourist, and I mean all of them. Let Down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that was one at first I didn't quite understand in the same way as the others, and Lucky.
Right.
I mean, come on.
Yeah.
Right.
It's just amazing songs.
Yeah.
It's just amazing songs, and the performances are so good.
Truly. I also feel like Tom York in that spirit got out of himself on that record. And it didn't, I feel like that was the beginning of his metamorphosis as a singer.
Yeah.
And really, truly, because I find him now to be an incredibly captivating singer. But even if I go back and listen to the bends, I'm like, meh, it's just Britpop to me.
Yeah.
The inflections of Britpop, there's nothing about his voice that is overtly compelling in the same, not nearly the same way.
Yeah.
And I feel like he took chances. He started to take chances with melodies and different inflections in his voice that now, have made him one of the iconic singers of music.
Right.
Yeah, he's one of those iconic singers because he has a lot to express.
Yeah.
And even if you watch the earliest videos where he hadn't fully grown into that voice and the range that he has found now, if you watch him, I mean, he looks like a guy who has a lot to get out.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like it was a real catharsis for him when they landed on whatever they were doing in OK Computer.
Yeah.
Right. I would so love to know it obviously wasn't a flip of a switch. I mean, there was a lot of work that went into it, but just the drastic change, I'd be so interested to...
I feel like somebody must have had a conscious decision to approach things from a very different place. Because I don't think you happen upon that accidentally. I don't think you happen upon that sort of cut and paste method of splicing things together. Like I think that's pretty intentional.
Yeah, somebody had to have had that impetus.
Yeah, I feel like it's almost like William Burroughs, where the moment where he, as a writer, he was like a normal prose writer, and then he made a conscious decision to cut and paste.
Right.
And from that point forward, I forget what book that is, but from that point forward, like everything past that is abstract and fucked up, you know?
Yeah.
Right. Even lyrically, the first two, obviously, Creep is still like one of their best known songs, and that's very much a songwriter, here's my perspective on the world, or woe is me thing, and it felt like there were songs like that on the Bends as well. And then things got more abstract with OK Computer. Even though there's I's and U's and stuff on the album, he seems to disappear a little bit as just a songwriter that you can picture singing the song. It's more of a world.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like he's painting. That's where he starts the painting of, lyrically.
To maybe greatest effect. I mean, I don't know. A friend of mine who was not into the follow-up records at all felt like this was their peak. And I was really in Rainbows. I was living in LA when that came out. And this friend of mine he was not into it anymore. He didn't like them anymore.
Interesting.
And he felt like Tom York didn't have anything to say. And he kept talking about how on OK Computer he actually had real things to say. And I didn't feel that way. But
No. I think, far be it for me to say what their peak is, but to me, Kid A is the elemental peak of what they were starting to get at with OK Computer. To me, that's like a place, and then they've kind of done offshoots from that place.
Yeah, that's when the toolbox was full.
Yeah, and I think to me, Kid A is one of my favorite records of the last, probably ever. And OK Computer is not far behind it for sure, but I feel like they came here and they said, oh yeah, just up that hill is where we want to go.
It has felt to me in the past, I definitely remember thinking back then that they'd sort of hit the pinnacle of that rock band thing with OK Computer, and that they needed to just go a completely different direction.
Totally. Yeah, like OK Computer, in Paranoid Android, you hear they start to play with like the filters on the drums with that thing.
Yeah.
And so clearly their impetus was, we want to push this in a really sort of electronic direction. Right. We don't quite know how to do that yet. And that was their way of flirting with that. And I think it's interesting because they're still a band playing and they're not cutting things up in quite the same way. It's interesting to think about they're still a rock band, but they're playing with these ideas that they don't know quite how to execute yet. Right. And the innocence of that is really interesting. The sort of like, it's kind of punk rock in a way, it's definitely a bit punk rock, OK Computer, from that perspective.
Yeah.
Because they don't quite know how to do some of the things yet. And that's what's also fucking great about it.
Yeah, that's a part of what's appealing about that band also is that all the members seem to be curious and obviously don't know any of them, but it seems to me that they are all hungry and curious still to discover new things, and I'm sure they all bring a lot of different interests to the table musically. So out of a group of 5 and a 6th member who's an engineer who works all the time and a producer, like, it's not surprising to me that at least one member would want to start fucking around with electronic, at least rhythms or electronic instruments.
Judging from his solo records, my impulse is to think that Tom York was a big part of that.
Yeah.
For sure.
Right.
Which I also love. I love his solo records.
Yeah.
Beautiful stuff.
He's explored that stuff pretty deeply.
Yeah.
And Johnny seems like the one got deeper into classical music and probably arranging and
the soundtracks.
To your point, they're all still curious and hungry and then interested in different things. That brings a lot of influence to whatever they're going to get together and do.
So many bands, even bands I've toured with, people make a record or two and then they're just talking about restaurants and schools that their kids are going to.
Yeah.
There's very little discussion about anything new or fresh or...
Yeah.
Obviously, there's a lot of musicians who are curious and who are interested in expanding their musical horizons, but it's not everybody.
No, it's
No.
true.
And like you said, I don't know Tom York at all, but he seems to be sort of insatiable, and I just can't imagine him getting comfortable with anything or not wanting to continue to create and not, or putting out something that seems to be repeating himself. I just picture him as a guy that's just constantly needing to push forward and like a
It's not
consummate
just
artist.
music either, you know. It's
Right.
that desire to just create something,
Mm-hmm.
and you could see that drives him in a really particular fashion. Like that thing he did, what was it, last year or the year before, the dance.
Oh my God, that was so cool.
It was amazing.
Yeah.
And clearly, the music was incidental to the art of the motion in that, and I find that really cool that somebody, and it's not just pastiche with him,
Right.
and he's not just putting on a mask or putting on a suit and dressing it up. He clearly just wants to create new and interesting things, even if it fucking fails.
Right.
And that's kind of the mark to me, you know, like even if it's totally a commercial failure, it doesn't matter.
Right.
I mean, obviously he has the luxury of making a commercial failure, but
Right.
but it just clearly doesn't matter. He just wants to create things. Whereas
Yeah,
like I
it's
see
just so rare that
Johnny Greenwood wants to create music, but Tom York seems to me to want to just create anything.
Yeah.
Anything that's interesting, which I find the way that filters into the music is really, really curious.
Right. And it makes for nice other things to accompany the music or to see outside of the music. You're talking, what you mentioned, the dance thing was the thing on Netflix,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
That's 3 songs from his.
That's right.
solo.
It starts with an S. I can't remember the name of it. You could edit that in later.
Right.
it was for Anima. It was
That's right.
and it was Paul Thomas Anderson who
Right.
did it.
Right.
I'm not sure who the choreographer was.
Right.
And those videos that Paul Thomas Anderson has done with Tom York are beautiful.
They're also
Or with-
great, yeah.
Yeah. The daydreaming video.
That's actually another interesting thing is you would be forgiven for thinking that Radiohead, or maybe even specifically Tom York, is afraid of collaboration because he's stayed with the same collaborator for a long time making records.
Yeah.
But I actually find that to be the most open. And you kind of, it's emblematic in his relationship with Godrich and then his relationship with Paul Thomas Anderson.
And with the band.
And with the band.
Because they could have...
They could have dissolved.
He
by
could
now.
have
Oh, for sure.
switched it up.
And,
Yeah.
to a degree, he tried with Atoms for Peace. But that's another example of, like, here's a guy who just is open.
Right.
Just open cosmically at all times to whatever creative impulse is coming in. That's the kind of shit that I find really compelling.
Right.
You can see that there's nothing stopping him. There's no, like that thing that, we all have gut reactions like, ooh, chorus guitar. Ooh, I don't want to do that. I'm sure he has none of that,
Oh, we have chorus bass on this record, so I don't know what you're talking about.
Chorus fretless bass.
Yeah. I mean...
Well, that's the thing. Like, why shut an impulse off? Like, that's kind of it, A band like Radiohead doesn't come about and then consequently make Kid or OK Computer or anything after that without having that openness. It just doesn't happen.
I think that grows as you get older too.
Yeah,
though.
for sure.
If you are that kind of person, because I remember having much stronger rejective impulses as a kid.
Yeah.
Much
Even in the
more.
last
Even
3
10
records
years
that
ago.
we've made together, all of us probably.
I was much more stiff
Yeah.
coming into
Yeah.
it and much more open-minded. Now, also, I know a lot more about music and all kinds of different music.
Sure.
And a lot of those sounds I like.
Yeah.
Rototoms. We don't have any here, but that stuff like that where it's usually a punchline of a joke.
Right.
Eventually, you hear it used in a way where you're like, oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I can't imagine what all they've been exposed to, considering all the time they've spent in the studio or
Sure.
touring or being around other musicians or being asked to play on whatever. So,
You know what I find interesting about bands like Radiohead, that there are a few bands that make me think of this, like REM would probably be one, and even to a degree U2, or at least up until a certain point U2, these bands that you don't hear any of anything else in them.
right.
Which I always find interesting. Like most artists, you hear something of somebody else in them, and I just don't with Radiohead.
With Radiohead, I hear. Well, I mean, they have oftentimes I can hear what they referred to, like what we were talking about with Can,
Oh, interesting.
with krautrock and stuff like that.
Sure. Okay.
And then
yeah, yeah. That's
Johnny
fair.
Greenwood's classical references,
Right.
you can often hear.
Right.
Also, they're quite transparent in terms of what has been moving them.
Yeah.
I remember for a while they were putting out those playlists, or
Right.
way before Spotify and stuff like that. They were just putting out lists of songs that they liked,
Online, yeah.
and I wasn't following it very closely. But every time I would look at it,
I wasn't following it closely, but on September 3rd of 2001,
it was, I think it was the 5th track on like a 40-song playlist. But I mean, honestly, it was most of the time I didn't know the songs,
yeah,
and I knew quite a bit.
yeah,
And there were quite a few members, I think mostly from Tom York and Johnny Greenwood. A lot of the stuff I ended up checking out.
sure, yeah.
And actually a lot of it was really avant-garde, and then you could tell that they just appropriated it and made it accessible. And I think that's one of their great skills, is that they have had this appetite and curiosity to seek out things that are really quite fringe,
yeah,
and then using aspects of those recordings, or just using aspects of those
Yeah.
that they plug in. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what they did with Idiotech.
yeah. I guess
But that's
fair.
a sample.
Yeah,
But there are songs where I hear that they borrowed a style. or
I
a
guess
beat.
that's fair. Yeah, I should have probably said that I don't hear overtly, like with a band like Tame Impala, where you just like,
Yeah, it's different.
oh, you guys are just aping a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I never hear Radiohead aping anything, per se.
Yeah.
What was it early on? Who were they compared to? I mean, they blended in for me because I didn't really know how to compare.
I think
didn't play
Blur.
much.
I mean, Blur was
Blur, yeah.
at least from my perspective, I was in the Blur camp. I was like a
Mhm.
Blur guy. I
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
totally into Damon Albarn and Blur. And I still love him. He's another one who's totally open, and I see him always open.
Yeah.
I mean, Gorillaz I love everything they've done.
Right.
But my perception is that they were sort of in the Blur. It was like Blur versus Oasis versus Radio. But Radiohead was kind of like the kid over in the corner. But the real fight was in between Blur and Oasis. Like, they were the ones in the sandbox, but Radiohead was waiting their turn.
Yeah. And Radiohead had diehard fans pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember, I think it was after the Bends or after OK Computer. I can't remember when those other records came out, but when Travis came out.
Oh,
Mhm.
yeah.
And who was the other? It was
Granddaddy?
Travis.
Pulp.
Yeah,
little
but
bit.
it was that singing the falsetto thing. Oh, and then Coldplay.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
I remember diehard radio fans were like, fuck these guys. These
Yeah,
guys
yeah.
are ripping the shit. And I mean, I felt like I did listen to Travis a little bit on the first record. I liked some of those songs. I didn't think it was such a thing. But I guess they created a bit of a new rock universe.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same way that you've talked about this on the show before, where Eddie Vedder created that sound,
Right.
right? I
Right.
mean, even if some of the bands who sang like that afterwards didn't deliberately copy them or feel like they were,
Right.
it created a genre.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the Tom York falsetto thing,
Yeah.
I think was really, especially because it was like Street Spirit. It was just these falsetto ballads,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Yeah.
Right.
It did really pollute the water. It became a thing.
Yeah, it's actually exactly the same thing that happened with Bon Iver.
Oh,
Mm.
totally.
And then you would walk into a coffee shop and you're like, this isn't Bon Iver.
Yeah.
Who is this?
Right.
And it's like some band from Australia.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And they're just, everything is just totally copied.
Totally copied down to the auto-tune thing.
Everything.
Yeah.
I mean, they use the same elements. And I mean, I don't even know the name of this band, so it's not, I don't want to tear anyone down, but I have had several occasions like that where I walk in, and I guess if I think back and Street Spirit was big, and then I would hear Travis, if I put them side by side now, I would say it's definitely a copy.
Yeah.
I guess maybe in somewhat slight defense of those bands, I imagine like all three of us, so many people consumed this record. Just
Yeah, so it seeped in.
yeah,
the way
and
that,
it's
that
there,
stuff
and
does,
then
yeah.
you want to hear something in a song you're writing. You're gonna go. I think your mind's
Right.
gonna go
Yeah.
to that. That's in your bank. You've heard it so many times that
Yeah.
even subconsciously, that's where that song wants to go.
Right.
Probably if you're
Right.
working on
Yeah, and then you're in the murky waters of influence
it. Right.
and how much of that is acceptable.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
for sure. A big one for me was, I think like I said before, I referenced this earlier, but that like sharp change of tonal quality in a song within one song, a section will just dramatically change character, and that became a huge thing for me. Just and you know, Sgt. Pepper did that, and yeah, I think that was like the only record I can. Well, maybe Pet Sounds did that too, but it had been a long time since a record really did that. You know?
And because the others weren't as abrupt. The Beatles were, but not Pet Sounds.
Yeah, the Beatles.
And I wasn't a big Beatles head, so it was new for me.
Right.
And then I
too.
discovered the Beatles. I mean, not that I discovered the Beatles afterwards, but I started digging through their catalog.
Yeah.
After Radiohead.
Right.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. It's like and probably because you need to be really good at that to make that work. And I don't mean good in a dumb sense. I mean good in a thoughtful sense. You need to really understand why you're doing that and for what purpose it serves.
Right.
And I feel like in the room at the time when they were making OK Computer, they understood what those purposes were.
Yeah, absolutely.
You
I mean,
know?
when you see them play Paranoid Android live, it just. And you were saying you hadn't seen them, right? Like,
I haven't seen them. Yeah.
I mean, I think maybe songs like that are the things that made me a really devout fan.
Yeah.
Because it just blows your fucking mind.
Right.
And then they have lights that are incredible.
Yeah.
And
That's
I mean,
like
that
Scorpions.
song is so, the changes are so abrupt.
Yeah.
And they go from pretty violent, like violent guitar riffs, and then just this beautiful, pasture opens up.
Yeah.
And it's really, it's powerful.
Just
La, da, da, na,
right.
na, 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 na.
Right.
And then,
See, the video almost ruined it for me because I love the video, by the way, but I remember seeing it quite early because it was those days of MTV or whatever it was in Canada. It was Much Music. But they played that video a lot, and I think I probably saw the video before I had the record, and it's dark,
Yeah. Am I right in thinking it's animated?
It's animated,
Okay,
and there's one, I remember this image, this stuck with me, that at one point, it's a violent video, like the guy's limbs get cut off and he's sinking down to the bottom of the ocean.
Yeah.
It's quite brilliant, but it's heavy imagery for a song. So I had to unwatch the video in my mind to have my own experience of that song.
Sure, yeah.
So I guess that's because Karma Please, that the imagery matched somehow.
Right.
But I didn't always see a limbless person sinking to the bottom of the ocean when I listened to Paranoid Android.
But it fits with the lyrics. I remember an experience of reading the booklet along with this album and it taking me to a different level of appreciating it because I knew the songs, but I hadn't really connected the words all together. I don't think I read the booklet for a little while. And at some point I did, and just the imagery of it. And so for that song, Paranoid Android, please could you stop the noise? I'm trying to get some rest from all the unborn chicken voices in my head. Is like...
Oh, I didn't even realize the word chicken is in there.
What is that? I mean, that's not violent necessarily, but very...
I don't think it's a mismatch.
Right.
It's just specific.
Right.
That's what I mean. It's when a music video has such a specific narrative.
Right.
You see the narrative, or I do when I listen to the song.
Yeah.
Right.
I guess that's the tricky thing about music videos. They're either so vague that they're just kind of boring, or whatever.
Meaningless.
Yeah, or they're so narrative that you don't really pay attention to the music.
I want to go back for a second to you talked about with tonal shifts within songs, just for someone that is not a musician maybe that might be listening to this. Do you have like an example that
I guess Paranoid Android is a great example of that. I always think of that if I'm thinking of that thing. And there's just like 3 or 4 distinctive if you look at the music coming at you as a character, there's 3 or 4 distinctive characters in that song. And the way the characters introduce themselves is so abrupt, but in a way that's it's jarring, but it's jarring to a gratifying effect.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm imagining them playing the song as a rock song, and then I think that record was done on 2-inch tape, so they had to have done splices.
Right.
They probably played it a number of different ways and then chose the section to come into like, that sort of languid, la, na, 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 and then into that next section, right? So that's a big splice there.
Well, apparently, Paranoid Android was composed of 3 different songs.
Oh, well, that makes total sense.
Yeah, and
then.
and it was just the remnants of those 3 songs. I think that's the story.
That makes total sense. Yeah, because then you would conceivably just kind of paste them together in a way, and then make it work.
Yeah,
and exploit the see, like oftentimes, if you have a song that has such dramatically different sections, people try to blend them.
Right.
Yeah.
That's like the thing that most people try to do, and instead. Radiohead and Sgt. Pepper is an example of this, where you're exploiting those changes and making them more exaggerated. Frank Zappa is actually a great example of this. All those early Zappa records and Mothers of Invention records, and you're trying to shock the listener. So you're actually, instead of trying to blend sections, you're intentionally making them very, very different. Your drum sounds change out of nowhere, or this or that or the other thing.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah.
it takes a particular character to want to give that to people.
Oh, totally, yeah.
I mean,
the provocateur
I've always
thing.
appreciated Zappa, but it's never moved me.
Yeah, I mean, my dad was a big Zappa fan, and I guess I could actually probably point my finger at Zappa for being the thing that made me appreciate provocateurs in all sorts of arts.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same reason I like a filmmaker like Lars von Trier or Michael Haneke. I want that provocation. I want to feel like somebody's picking a fight with me when they make art.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't mean that in a cynical way, but I just mean it in a way like picking the fight could take the form of something innocuous, like just making me think about why they made that decision. I love that shit.
Yeah.
Like, I love watching the end of Breaking the Waves, the Lars von Trier film, and you have this super, unaffected film. It's a dark story. It's filmed so sort of raw and emotionally, and there's no pretense about the way it's made. And then he makes this choice at the end to add the supernatural sound of the bells in heaven.
Right.
And this was a film made with a handmade camera about a guy who wants his wife to fuck other men because he can't fuck her because he's paralyzed.
Right.
Like the most brutally heartbreaking story. And he adds supernatural bells in the end. Like, I feel like when I first saw that, I was like, he's picking a fucking fight with me. And I love that. And it's the same with like Bergman and Persona. Like, he was picking a fight with you by the end of that film. And Radiohead did the same thing for me on OK Computer. Like, Tom York was grabbing me when he was singing by my collar and telling me to like get with the fucking program, and in a way that wasn't like political or like punk rock did, but in a different, very different way.
Right.
It was like instigating all of those intellectual things in your brain that just want to be provoked,
Yeah. And I feel like it was done with a purpose and with an emotional intent.
Yeah, exactly.
Because sometimes provocation, I feel like sometimes Von Trier suffers from this a little bit, where sometimes I feel like he does it just to do it.
For sure.
Like a person at a dinner party who says something blasphemous just to get people worked up.
Right.
But there's no real meaning to what they're doing.
Right,
They just want to fuck shit up.
It's trolling, yeah.
Yeah, it's trolling, I guess.
I would argue with you on that, but that's a whole different
podcast.
podcast.
I mean, we'd have to argue when, where, and when, because I agree that sometimes it's inspired. The thing you just referred to there, I thought was also meaningful.
Yeah.
That'll be your podcast.
Yeah.
Tom York, you could tell, I think, in the movie, based on my memory, not having seen it for almost 20 years probably, in Meeting People is Easy, he was talking about the fridge buzz that he mentions in Karma Police as these bands that he hears on the radio. It just sounds like a fridge buzz. He seemed to be just more kind of tuned in, and that's a lot of what that movie was about, I think, was his sort of mental state at this point of just having hit such stardom.
Yeah.
And it seemed like engaging with the world of the industry or the system, and I think they've been able to be out of that for a long time.
Yeah.
Well, and the parent, I mean, he comes off so badly in that movie, but after having watched their career and his own career, unfold after that movie was made, I understand what the angst was. It was an angst of self-preservation and being able to fight off the forces that will corrupt you or exploit you, or corrupt you in a way where you don't even realize it, and before you know it, like, you don't really make art anymore, and you're just the guy that I was referring to earlier in bands who's just, got enough money to do whatever, and everything's fine, and that you accept mediocrity. And the angst, I think, that's captured in that is of a person who really doesn't want that to happen. And then is just also a person becoming famous and being a prima donna about it. And, I haven't watched that movie in ages, but I remember when I watched it, I was like, huh. I wish I hadn't watched this.
I remember getting the same impression from things that I had seen with Roger Waters, like post Dark Side of the Moon.
Yeah, he had a terrible reputation.
Terrible. And I think it came from exactly the same place, because he was super cognizant of the band going that way.
But wasn't he mean to them and whatnot?
He became a bit of a authoritarian in that band. But they, from Dark Side, they continued to still make, like, Wish You Were Here was a great record, of course, and Animals is one of my favorites. One of the great records.
Where was Metal in all of that?
Metal was before Dark Side.
Oh, it was before?
So Metal was, if I'm looking at it in the same trajectory, if I'm looking at Dark Side as Kid A, Metal was OK Computer. And I think that maps pretty well. And then I think Wish You Were Here is probably Amnesiac, actually. And it all actually maps pretty well. But I think Roger Waters had a similar thing. And when I was younger, I was like, oh, fuck that guy. He's such an asshole. But as an older person, I get it. Like, he was trying to protect the ability for that band to make music.
It's those early interviews with Bob Dylan.
Oh, yeah.
And, who knows anything about Dylan? But he was so provocative with the press and just so unwilling to be agreeable, know?
I forget what that one quote. There's a quote in, I think it's Don't Look Back. There's somebody who asks him about, like, writing a song, and he's like, I don't know, man, you write a fucking song, or something like that, and it's just so, it's just like putting his finger in the guy's eye.
Right.
That's what I tell my mom when she asks me about new stuff. It's just so ridiculous. I was gonna say the Metal. I always think of as a minor work because I usually skip Echoes.
Oh yeah,
but I love Echoes, but
it's
not one I listen to every time.
Yeah, I think they're finding a place. I think they're finding a place. Metal's an interesting record. There's like some really good. To me, there's, as a huge Pink Floyd person, there's a lot of stuff on there where you can see where they're going. You can see the destination in the distance.
Yeah,
I mean, Dark Side is unimpeachable, but Metal has some virtue. But Pompeii, Live at Pompeii was a thing. Like, that Live at Pompeii, it was the era that they were working that out.
That was epic.
And it's just so good.
Yeah,
it's
that was an incredible endeavor.
Yeah, and what's amazing about, and I don't get this impression from Radiohead, is that, like, Pink Floyd, in order for Pink Floyd after Dark Side of the Moon and Wish You Were Here to an extent, in order for them to continue making music that still had integrity on a number of levels, it required Roger Waters to become the dictator, basically, and to, like, keep it contained to that vision. And I don't feel like Radiohead has had that. I don't get the impression that, like, Tom York has said, okay, I'm taking the reins now. Right. And to keep this thing together. I just feel like they're all willing participants in this journey, and it makes it more beautiful because of that,
Right, yeah.
Because even the failures are beautiful and good and worthwhile.
Yeah, that's where the childhood friends stuff comes in, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
I think of my brother and his circle. He has a circle of friends that he went to high school with, and they're still tight. Yeah. There's 5 or 6 of them, and they spend time together all the time.
Yeah.
And there's just a bond between them that is incredible.
Yeah.
And I don't have a single friend left from high school.
Yeah, same.
So
it's like Cobra Kai. You would know that. Right. When they get back together.
Right.
It's like never ended. Never stopped.
What they're riffing, it's like the Outsiders.
Yeah, it's like and they get in a fight like it's the old days. I mean, it's beautiful.
There's not like 30 years in between that you can really. They're still so raw about it.
Yeah.
30 years later, like they wouldn't. In reality, they wouldn't even really remember what happened. Probably.
Yeah.
Is it the same people? The same Karate Kid?
Same actors.
They got the same people back.
Yeah.
That's what's brilliant about it.
Yeah.
You should watch it.
Wasn't there a sitcom recently where they brought back the old people? Not to anyone's benefit.
Oh, probably.
I mean, they did it with Full House.
Yeah, but it wasn't. There was one recently.
Something else.
It wasn't Friends, but it was something like that.
Like Roseanne did it.
Yeah.
Well, if Karate Kid meant anything to you when you were 7 or 10 or 12,
yeah,
or
I think
whatever,
it did. I mean, as far as I remember.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted a gi and I wanted a headband.
The headband.
I mean, and I wanted to trim bonsai trees.
I kind of looked like that kid too when I was a kid.
You should definitely watch it just from a purely nostalgic place. I fully expected to hate it, but we put it on. We were in Montana and we put the first episode on, and I thought in my mind, like, okay, I'm going to bed in like 20 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
4 hours fucking later, we're like halfway through season 1. You know?
They get you with the nostalgia
yeah,
stuff.
it's so good.
That's part 1. How about those guys? Ending on a little Cobra Kai, talking just as passionately about Cobra Kai as they do Lars von Trier. Thanks to Dan and Jesse for doing that. They will be back for part 2. Thanks to Logan Cole for saying, "What's up with that?" and going to bed. It would have been way too long with him in there talking too. I'm just giving him a hard time. Jesse's album is out June 25th, Antelope Running. I'm very proud of my contribution to it and of my friends for making something that I find beautiful and inspiring and very meaningful, even more so because it happened during that time that we're not fully out of course, but felt way more in it at that time. Part 2 will be up soon. We're at beforethestreampodcast@gmail.com, Before the Stream on Instagram and Twitter. Give us a follow, give us a review, rating, rate, subscribe, all that stuff. If you can, it really does help. I hope everyone's doing okay out there. Thank you for listening. Be back with part 2 very soon. Bye.
Are you going to run through? I was hoping you were going to run through lyrics on this one.
I can. I mean, I know them all.
Yeah,
I haven't thought.
You're talking about making friends is easy? Or meeting people is easy?
Meeting people is easy. Yeah, I'm not making it very clear.
The Radiohead fans will love that.
They'd be like, these guys don't know anything.
Right.
You're talking about Physical Graffiti too?
in the movie.
Not listening to that guy's record. Fuck that guy.
I'll make it all right. Don't worry.